Alistair, I want to take a couple of moments and step back and reflect a little bit on the quality of the peace that we are establishing, that has been established in the Western Balkans. This year marks the 30th anniversary of the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, a war which, until the current war in Ukraine, was the most violent conflict that Europe had experienced since the end of the Second World War. 30 years ago, not only was war raging in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but it was looming on the horizon in Kosovo, in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, and once again in Croatia. Now, a few weeks ago, I had the pleasure of being interviewed by a team of young Kosovar journalists who'd come to Oxford. And at the end of the interview, I asked them a question. I asked them, what are your concerns about the future? And without any hesitation, they offered the same response: a return to war. Now, statistically speaking, their response was not baseless. Research that I've done with colleagues at Oxford on the longevity of peace after armed conflict paints a very disturbing picture, which you can see here on the screen. This shows how long peace established after civil wars lasts as measured in days. These are peace episodes of 1 year minimum. So how long these peace episodes, and there are 210 in the period 1990 to 2013, how long they last as measured in days. And our research shows that once peace has been established following a civil war, the chances of survival of that peace after 2 years is 99%, which is very good, 99%. After 3 years, 83%, also good. But after 12 years, it's less than 50%. In other words, within 12 years, nearly half of all civil wars reignite. And that's a high rate of peace failure, or conflict recidivism, as we sometimes refer to it. So, should we share the concerns of these Kosovar journalists and be worried about conflict recidivism in the Balkans? Short answer is no. Obviously, what sets this region apart from most other places in the world is the degree of robust third-party engagement, militarily and otherwise, on the part of NATO and the EU. And that makes a huge difference as both a deterrent, but also an effective mechanism of conflict management. But, and we've heard this already this morning, we must not be complacent. Moreover, we must recognize that peace in the region is not self-sustaining. It requires the presence of NATO and EU forces to maintain it. Furthermore, it's a minimal peace. We're talking about peace understood as the absence of armed conflict, but most of us here, I think, would agree that peace is more than that, or should be more than that. It should also entail a positive disposition, tolerance, respect, acceptance on the part of members of society towards one another. Peace understood as the absence of armed conflict is what scholars refer to as a negative peace. A negative or cold peace may exist between adversaries, as was the case between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War, or between formerly warring states, as is the case between Egypt and Israel today, or among different identity groups within states, as with unionists and nationalists in Northern Ireland today. A negative or cold peace is what prevails in large parts of the Western Balkans. Now, does it matter if a peace is a cold peace? A warm or positive peace arguably has greater intrinsic value. It's desirable in and of itself. It's also arguably more stable than a cold peace. Few will question the relatively greater stability of the positive peace that exists today between Germany and France in post-World War II Europe, and the sense of security that affords these two former enemies in contrast to the other cases that I just mentioned. While a negative peace may be durable in a post-Civil War state, a positive peace, it's widely agreed, affords communities greater prospects for preventing the recurrence of violent conflicts. Now, can a cold peace become a warm peace? In many parts of the world that have experienced bloody religious wars in the past, and think about 16th and 17th century Europe, for instance, there is now mutual tolerance and respect among different religious communities that were once mortal enemies. More recently, thanks in part to the work of the OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities and others, there's been meaningful improvements in relations among rival national communities as a result of the curbing of discrimination against national minorities, reforms to educational systems, including textbooks, the enhanced representation of national minorities in government, and various trust and confidence building measures. And I want to stress, these are not hollow measures. They've made a genuine difference in the quality of peace in many countries. Now, the opportunities to promote social cohesion are considerable, but they will require the sincere efforts of national authorities in order to gain traction. Committed leadership is what made possible the accord that established the peace that broke the stalemate between North Macedonia and Greece after 30 years. And it took courage to sign that accord because there was strong public opposition in both countries. It's the absence of such leadership in part that explains the continued failure to broker a peace between Greek and Turkish Cypriots, and the absence of leadership committed to building positive peace is evident throughout the Western Balkans. Now, I appreciate that sometimes a negative peace is all that one can realistically hope to achieve, at least initially. And I think it has been the case in Kosovo. Kosovar Albanians suffered severe discrimination and repression, and Kosovar Serbs suffered retaliation in return. The Serbian minority and the Albanian majority in Kosovo today are deeply alienated from one another and, to a large degree, live separate lives, sometimes as a matter of personal choice, but sometimes at the behest of their community leaders. Peace prevails in Kosovo, but it is a negative peace. There's no armed conflict, but there's very little positive engagement across national lines. Now, although various efforts are being made and should continue to be made to bridge the Serbian-Albanian divide, a negative peace is arguably the most that can be achieved at this time. It's perhaps unrealistic to expect a warm peace to develop anytime soon, and the same is true across much of the Western Balkans. Beyond the memories of recent trauma, which explain the situation that prevails as I've just described it, there are other forces working against a warm peace in the region, and this is where geopolitics comes into the picture. The Western Balkans have again become a fulcrum of geopolitical competition. We've been talking about that this morning. A competition which is reinforcing nationalism and further entrenching divisions in the region. The EU and NATO are pulling one way. Russia, which has become increasingly visible, increasingly active in regional politics, is pulling another way. We can debate the extent of Russia's influence in the region, but I think it's fair to say that at the very least, Russia is leveraging its connections with political parties, business elites, and opinion makers in the region to oppose the EU and NATO and to encourage disintegration. Russian support to Republika Srpska specifically has been reinforcing the separatist tendencies of its leadership. And as my colleague Dimitar Betchev has observed, even if Russia has no capacity to project itself militarily into the region, it can take advantage of divisions in the region, existing divisions, to foment trouble. And at the same time, we're seeing the appeal of liberal political values which underpin and nourish positive peace, waning. And this is partly related to a global trend, again, something else which we've been acknowledging here, the growing strength of illiberalism, the rise of authoritarianism, and the concomitant calling into question of the merits of the liberal democratic model. And as The Economist's own intelligence unit has observed, democratic rights around the globe are at their lowest ebb in 15 years. Closer to home, this is reflected in challenges to some of the foundational norms of the European Union, and not only from outside the EU, but from within the EU. And as a result, the normative force of the EU is being undermined, and with it, the primacy of liberal political values. Now, are there ways of meeting the challenge of building positive peace in the Western Balkans? I believe there are, and maybe we can discuss this. I see we're out of time, so perhaps we can explore these in the discussion. Thanks very much.